Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Tugboat Talks podcast. With the recent pandemic happening and a lot of people quarantined or self quarantined or self isolated inside their own homes, I realize that there's a very heavy struggle happening right now with people's sobriety and with their mental health. For more conversation about the mental health piece, check out the other podcast that I did recently with Jason Piercy. That one we discuss parenting in a pandemic and some of the economic fallout of COVID-19 pandemic. However, today's episode is primarily focused on mental health as it pertains to addictions. On today's podcast, we have once again another good friend of mine. His name is Jason Stock. He has personally gone through an addictions journey and is currently in recovery. He unpacks sort of how that affected his family and his married life a little bit, as well as how it affected his own feelings and shortcomings, as well as some of the more vulnerable aspects of that journey. So, I hope that this conversation helps someone sort of begin to unpack their own addiction journey and help with someone else's sobriety during this pandemic and being locked inside. So, with no further ado, here's the conversation with Jason Stock. If you have any questions or concerns, please let us know. We will put resource information on this screen and on this panel so that people can reach out and get the help that they need in this really trying time. So, once again, here's the conversation with Jason Stock.
Hey, so Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, John.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good.
You got a little coffee going? I got a coffee going.
Yeah, I do. My wife gave me a tip before leaving the house. She said, the internet's going to judge you for having a Tim Hortons during a pandemic. And I had to judge whether I cared about that or not. And I decided I still wanted the Tim Hortons coffee.
Listen, the reality is that the internet has a lot of opinions on a lot of things right now because they got nothing else to do besides have opinions.
Yeah, I was very safe, though. I Purelled. I did all the things I was supposed to do.
Did all the things. Listen, I went to Dominion yesterday. I had a great experience. Everybody was basically 6 feet away from each other. Shout out to Dominion and CBS, man. It was incredible. Like, at no point in time did I I had to pass a couple of people in the aisles or whatever, but it was fine. And so I went out and got all the things that I wanted. I got Captain Crunch. The only thing I couldn't get was a decent sized turkey, but it turns out my neighbors had a good one, so they gave it to me.
Nice.
So we're gonna have turkey dinner on Easter Sunday. Okay, so first things first. I know that with the conversation that I wanted to have with you today, specifically revolving around addictions, because last night I got some really bad news that someone associated with the Christian motorcycle organization that I'm a part of was going through a really hard time with the social isolation stuff. And I know that there's got to be a lot of people right now who are facing a lot of depression, a lot of addiction issues, a lot of self-worth issues, a lot of loneliness issues that they're trying to push through right now and be strong. And so in the light of this isolation thing, and my thoughts going to you and your history and a big part of your routine, which we can touch on more now in a little bit, with regards to you doing meetings, right? Addictions meetings. I knew that, with throwing that routine off, it's got to be difficult for right now. So first off, let's start off with how are you doing and how are you coping through this pandemic and social isolation, period of your time?
Yeah, man, the isolation is tough. When I started my recovery journey, I started it in kind of isolation. I went away and went to a rehab facility for 90 days, and then they released me back out into the wild, and I had to figure out how to do this sober thing without, the help of counselors and, a whole crew of people helping me. And, routine was a real big part of that. I got, some meetings and some people that I count on to be able to see day in and day out. And, places that I go that help keep me like mentally sort of on point and, mentally sober. And when this COVID-19 situation hit, and we started to have to go into our caves and isolate, it really took a toll on me mentally. And some days are way better than others, and some days are just bad. And like there's been some tools that I've used, online meetings and things like that to try to keep up with my recovery. But man, we'll talk about this later, but addiction's really a disease of the mind, and
Right.
it's a thinking and feelings disease. And when you put anybody that's an addict, with too much time on their hands to get inside their own head, it is a real dangerous time. And this is it's a scary time for anyone who struggles with addiction, because our support systems are altered, if not taken away, and it's not easy.
So let's back up a little bit now. I want to kind of dig in just to give some people who watch this, because the viewer base for this has been very widespread, and so I want to give people some background. So how long ago was it that you went away for recovery, and then we'll back up even further than that? You've been home now how
Yeah.
long?
I checked into rehab on February 1st, 2018, and checked out on May 1st, 2018. So I did 90 days.
Okay, so so 3 months you did a recovery. What was
Yeah.
your breaking point? And admittedly, I was present and a part of your life while you were going through this process.
Yeah.
I still consider myself, not, don't get me wrong, not fortunate, but I honestly feel privileged to be close enough with you to have been a little portion of that walk. Um, but I do want to sort of touch base on where your life was, and sort of your tipping point before going into that.
Yeah. And it's different for everybody, because we all have like preconceived notions of what addiction looks like. Like, we can always compare ourselves to others and think like, well, I'm not as bad as the guy in the street corner with a liquor bottle and a brown paper bag, so maybe I'm not an addict. But for me, like, the foundation was cracking around my life for a long time. And um you know it I probably drank way heavier than I would like to care to admit, from 2013 until the the time that I went away to rehab. And it got progressively worse and worse and worse. And I wasn't a blackout drinker, John. Like, when you hear different people talk about addiction, like, some
Yeah.
people are blackout drinkers and binge drinkers. But my thing was, I needed to drink or use something to numb my life every single day. There wasn't a day that went by where I didn't have something, in order to numb my feelings. And sometimes it was leaving work at uh 12 o'clock in the afternoon to go throw down 4 pints at Montana's before trying to go back to work for 2 o'clock and finish the day. And it just, the insanity of this disease is crazy when you look back on it and you start seeing the stupid things that you used to do, and the way that you tried to hide it from everybody else and lie about it and manipulate your circumstances and situations. But for me, like, it really, it took a big toll on my family. And I love my wife. My wife is an amazing person, and she stuck by me through a lot. And um, as part of this sort of recovery journey, we had some stipulations if we were going to continue as a married couple. And one of them was that no more drinks, and the other one was no more lies. And if I'm honest, like I was way more scared about the lies piece than the drink piece, because I knew there was help for that. And I
Right.
didn't really understand how self-centeredness and dishonesty was such a core component of addiction and alcoholism until I started to get into the recovery work. And so, it was really just the implosion of years and years of just abusing my mind, abusing my body. And it just came to the place where the wheels fell off the bus, John, and I just couldn't function anymore. Um, I was a danger to myself, and I was a danger to people that were around me, because I stopped having the ability to control what I was going to do when I would drink. You know, uh,
Right.
I
Right.
don't, I don't like to talk about it a lot openly, but you know, unfortunately, like I used to drink and drive a lot, and that's not something a non-addict probably does.
Right.
And so I was putting my life at risk. I was putting, society's life at risk every day, and I just couldn't function anymore. So I had to get help.
So we've clearly established that in this period of your life, which it seemed to go on for 5 years, right? Where heavy for, you said 13 to 18, we'll say. Clearly you put your professional life at risk. You put your married life at risk. You had some, obviously you say you had some trials to overcome with the family, and then personal as well, with safety issues and driving and all that. What I want to know is, what did you discover, and are you currently tackling the root of your addictions? Like, what did you learn when you went through the 90-day recovery program?
Man, I learned so much, because
Like,
I
let's
always
let's
thought,
let's let's be more specific. Let's say, what did you learn about yourself? Number one, first piece. Number two, what did you learn about addictions as a disease?
yeah, I learned a lot about both, John. And, really, like, I was sick for a long time. And, you know, my struggle with addiction started way, way, way before 2013. I had my first drink when I was 10 or 11 years old. And, my first drunk when I was probably 16 or 17. And, you know, for those people that know me, they know that I'm I sometimes, on the best of days, have a difficult time connecting with other people. And for me, like, my childhood was kind of rough. And I was the kid that got made fun of a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends. Even though I played sports and different things like that, I had a real hard time walking through the world when I was a kid. And my self-esteem was really, really low. Um, and it was low as a kid, and as my adult life sort of progressed, regardless of what I was able to do in the world, like, I felt so bad about myself that it just drove this monster that was inside of me. And really, like, when I went to college is when my first stint in hardcore addiction really sort of took off, because I realized when I started uh, drinking and using drugs when I was in college, that all of a sudden I could fit in. I was more accepted, and I felt like I could talk to people, and it helped me feel like I was somebody. And I can remember, like, that feeling of, like, feeling like this thing that I was putting into my body was making me acceptable to the world.
Yeah, well, because the one core, especially if your addiction revolves around alcohol, which for yours, clearly it was, I guess. That alcohol does an incredible job of lowering our social inhibitions, right? Um,
Oh man.
you know what I mean? So you're in that. Here's what I find really interesting. And you talked about how you were sort of destroying your body on the inside, and I've always known you as somebody to be always working out. Even now, you're heavy into DDP yoga, right? Into jujitsu, all that sort of stuff. And it's so interesting to me to see somebody who works so hard college wrestling, right?
College football, high
College
school
football,
wrestling.
high school
Yeah.
wrestling. Okay. Somebody who works so much on the outside of their body and to just continue to put these toxins on the inside.
Oh man, it was like one of the things that we learned in rehab was that like addicts are really good at putting on masks. And I remember being like a teenager and falling in love with these bodybuilding magazines. And like, I remember becoming mentally obsessed for the first time with body image when I was like 13 or 14 years old. I really, really wanted to look like the guys in the bodybuilding magazines and was willing to do anything in order to make that happen. And it was because I felt like if I were to put on this exterior front to the world, that I was big and strong and macho and all that kind of stuff, that I would somehow be more liked or more accepted, and that it would help me with my self-esteem. But it never worked. And just despite whatever results that I was able to produce physically, still felt like nothing on the inside. And that's one of the things that I learned at rehab. One of the first things that they had me do was write my life story. And if you can kind of imagine this, like, we live in Newfoundland and I fly 2,500 miles to the state of the Tiger King, Oklahoma.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't know that at the time, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
So I arrive at this center and, I check in. It's a Friday, and it was a real long weekend because there's nothing going on the weekends in rehab.
Also worth noting that when this came up, I remember it came up very quickly.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
the option came up and you were gone within like, I think a week or two.
Yeah, it was pretty quick because I, again, like, if I didn't get help, I was going to die.
Right.
Because my addiction had hit the point where I was going to do something that was going to hurt myself, whether it was get in a car crash or overdose or drink myself to death, or like, if I didn't get help, I'm not here talking to you today.
Right.
Guaranteed.
Right.
And if I go out and drink again, I don't know if I have another recovery left.
So tell me again now, but when you showed up, so Friday you're showing up.
I show up and within the first week I get my first assignment, and they say, I want you to write your life story. And I'm like, my life story? What does that even look like? And so they gave me a pad of paper and they said, just sit down and start writing. Start from like your birth date, where were you born, write about your family, write about your life as a kid, write about whatever you want to write about, and write your life story. And I got really, really into that project, and I took it really seriously. And I wound up writing 72 pages front and back, like sort of encapsulating what my life was. And then assignment number 2 was I had to read that to my small group. We had a small group of about 8 or 9 guys, and I had to read all of it out loud. So not only did I write it, but I had to like verbalize it and become humble enough to share my deepest, innermost sort of feelings about myself. And John, you know what it was? It was 72 pages of shame.
Right.
It was 72 pages of me looking back on my life and really beating myself up. And, after a lot of crying and a lot of tears and a lot of uncomfortable feelings, when it was over, my counselor, the other guys that were there, the feedback that they provided me was like, man, when are you going to stop beating yourself up? Like, when are you going to when are you gonna love yourself? And that was one of my biggest problems. What fueled my addiction was low self-esteem, feelings of shame. And before I went away to recovery, I didn't understand the difference between like shame and guilt. Like it's
Right.
normal for people to be guilty, but I really felt like I was a rotten apple. I really felt like I was a bad person. And I didn't feel like I was worthy of recovery for a long time because in my innermost thoughts, I really felt like I was just bad.
It's interesting because you touched on this self-esteem point, and this is really what sort of struck a chord with me recently. With, I've heard about people, attempting suicide. I've heard about people struggling with addictions right now. People struggling with like loneliness and isolation. And I know that right now this is a very difficult time. So what I am going to do is I'm going to get you after the fact to give me some resources, and we'll put those resources up at the beginning and the end of the video when I put it online for people who need to reach out. Once again, I'll share this on Facebook, if anybody's going through some really hard times right now where they're isolated or lonely, I'll give you a whole list of names of people that you can talk to and reach out to that I'd love to have a conversation, at least make you feel like you're not alone. I've been doing tons of video calls outside of podcasts, just connecting with people all over the world through the Christian brotherhood of the bike ministry, just to stay connected with people and to feel fulfilled. But it's really interesting because this lack of self-confidence thing manifests itself in many different ways. It manifests itself through addictions to money, to alcohol, to substances, to food, to socializing. It manifests itself in loneliness and all these issues that plague people. I mean, I can't begin to tell you. Same thing with me. I walk in large as life, 6'4" and 300 plus pounds into a room and everybody turns, but people don't realize that a lot of what makes me try as hard as I do is the fact that I often don't feel good enough, right? And you and I had this conversation a little while ago when I was going through a bit of a difficult period, and I had the same conversation with Jason Piercy a couple of nights ago about how the anxiety and the depression and the stress of not feeling good enough, and that's bound to happen to anybody who finds their self-worth. For me, I often found my self-worth through toys or music, or more recently, like my ability to perform in a business capacity. And I need to realize that I am the perfect fit for my life, right? Like I am what my wife and daughter need. I am what my brothers need. I am what I have been what you need at certain points in your life. You have been what I need at certain points in our life. And we need to understand that we are made and we exist here for a purpose, and that just because sometimes we don't see our own purpose doesn't negate the fact that it exists.
100%. And I remember, like, let's talk about the suicide piece for a second, because so many addicts and so many people are struggling right now. And unfortunately, that's a part of my story as well, too, because, with this alcoholic mind, one of the things that I learned about myself is that alcoholics, addicts, people who struggle with addiction, it all starts in our mind, man. Like it's all in our mind. And one of my critical thinking errors that I was able to identify when I was at rehab was what they call catastrophic thinking. And this thinking has led me to so much pain in my life, because I'm the type of person where I can have a bad phone call at work and hang up the phone, and within 5 minutes walk myself through getting fired, losing my house, losing my wife, losing my kids, being on the street, having to explain everything to everybody. And man, this is so real when it happens to me. It feels like it happened. Like, I've had so many experiences over the last couple of years where I've gotten fired from a job in my head,
Right.
when the outside reality is nowhere even near that.
Not even close
So
to it. No.
I'm living in this reality that doesn't exist. And so for me, where that took me when I was at rehab was, for the first 21 or 20, you know, 21 to 25 days, I showed up and I worked my tail off. I probably worked harder than anybody that was on the ranch at that time, because I was so focused on trying to get my family back.
Right.
And then I
And
just
and
hit
you were
this.
and you were manifesting that in a physical capacity,
Yeah.
because work ethic was what you had to put into that, and that's what you could still control at that moment.
Yeah. And I was always very much workaholic as well as an alcoholic, amongst other things. Like, it was
Everything
never
is,
just,
yeah, in excess.
like, it was everything was in excess. And so I went to rehab and I worked in excess. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote until I couldn't write anymore. And then I stopped working and I stopped talking. And this alcoholic brain of mine started telling me that life was never going to get any better, that I was never going to be good for anything, that I was bad for my kids, bad for my wife, bad for my friends. And then I started writing again. But what I did is I started writing all the reasons why I wasn't good enough. And it got real dark real fast. And I really started to think about what it would be like to exit stage left.
Right.
And I remember like one day we had this big couch in our common living room area, and group had just got done. I had my hood up, had tears on my eyes. I wasn't talking. And I was just kind of in this, what I later learned was what they call a suicidal fugue. It's like this mental state that people go into when they're thinking about taking their own life. And in those moments, just everything feels so surreal. It's almost like you're floating above your body, but just in a way that's just gross and heavy and ugly.
Right.
And in that moment, like, I was really done. And I was edging closer and closer to really considering whether or not the world would be better off without me.
So
And
so so what was the solace that you found in that? Because obviously this story has ended in, much better than it could have.
well, let me tell you what happened. We had this counselor. Her name's Kelly. And let me say, I promised my wife that I wouldn't swear on this podcast.
You can swear all you want. It's my podcast.
I know, but I'm going to say one swear word because it's what happened. And then I'm going to go back to my promise, because like, I am trying to live a good, upstanding life now. But this counselor stood over me, and she just sort of looked down, and she was like, "Get the fuck up." That's what she said. And it jarred me. It was like this, like, jarring, like I expected her to, like, sit down next to me and be real
Coddle you.
calm and,
Yeah.
like make me feel better about myself and all that kind
Nurse
of
you
stuff.
back to health, and yeah.
Nurse me back to health. And you know what she said? She said, "Get busy living or get busy dying. Figure out, make up your mind." But she said, "Before you do, let me tell you what's going to happen to your kids. They're going to be 3 times more susceptible to suicide if you take your life. Let me tell you what's going to happen to your wife, what she's going to go through. Let me tell you what all of your, friends that are still in your world are going to go through. Let me walk you through all that before you make your decision. And then you just decide." She was like, "But you can't live here anymore." And what she did, what I later found out, what she did is she broke me out of that state that people go into. And it's almost like a trance-like state. If you've ever seen someone get hypnotized, that's a lot what it's like. And then about an hour later, I had a counseling session with my counselor, and I had to talk to her about what happened. And at this time, I was still feeling really small. My eyes were bloodshot and red from crying. Like I was just beat out and tired. And I wound up telling her in that counseling session, my counselor said, well, what do you think brought you here? How did you get to this place where you wanted to take your own life? And I told her about something that happened the night before. The night before, I was in my dorm room and I prayed for like maybe one of the first times in a long time, really prayed, really prayed. And what I prayed for is I wanted Jesus, if he was real, to come into my room, to hold my hand, and to tell me everything was going to be okay.
Right.
That's what I wanted. That's what I prayed for very specifically. And it did not happen. And so when it didn't happen the next morning, I was like, well, God doesn't even care. And my mind started taking that and spinning that into just, another set of like terrible dialogues. And then, so I told her that, and she says, let me ask you a question, Jason. Where are you? And I was like, Oklahoma. She said, how did you get here? And I was like, I guess. She's like, how did you find us? We are a faith-based rehab center. How did you find us? And I was like, well, I just Googled, like, and somehow I found you. And mind you, later on, like, I can't recreate the Google search to make Clay Crossing, which is the rehab center that I went to, come up, because we're in Newfoundland, the way the search engines work and everything. I don't know how it happened, but somehow I found them and they found me, and I got there. And she was like, who's here with you now? And I was like, well, you are. And then she was like, who else is here with you now? Well, like, all these guys are here and the counselors are here. And she's like, could that be God? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. And she said, you might want to give that a thought as to whether or not maybe, just maybe, God's showing up in ways in your life that is not what you expected, but still showing up nonetheless.
Man, I had a part of this conversation the other night, same thing on the conversation with Jace, because we were talking about mental illness. We were talking about anxiety, depression. We were talking about being on antidepressants. And I said that, there is this immeasurable connection that we feel between people that we cannot put our finger on, right? It can't be measured. It can't be quantified or qualified. But it is definitely something that draws us towards people. The other thing that I want to circle back to just for a second is the encouragement that not only now have you come out the other side of recovery, and I understand that even right now, with social isolation, like, I understand that is a battle. Every day is a battle. What was it you said to me today on text message? You said you were trapped inside.
Yeah, no, what I said to you is my addiction is outside in the parking lot doing push-ups, waiting for me to let my guard down.
Yeah.
Because all we get is a daily reprieve, one day at a time. And so just let me tell you the end of the story, because I think it's important.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. But so later on that night, I went in. Every day we have a check-in period, 6:00. So 6:00, we got to say how our day was and what our goal is for the next day. This was a daily activity. So I go in and I take this opportunity to apologize to the guys, because when you're living in a community of, 22, 23 guys, everyone's got to pull their weight. And when someone doesn't pull their weight, the community suffers. So I apologized because I shut down and I stopped pulling my weight. And I showed them the writings of me wanting to, essentially end my life, and the letters that I have written to wife and kids and friends, and because I was really in a bad space. And so I said, what I want to do, guys, I'm going to burn these letters. because there's nothing good that comes from these letters anymore. No one needs to read this. No one needs to see it. I just want to burn it. And so, went outside. A friend of mine had me his lighter. We stood over a metal garbage can, and I set him on fire. And I watched him burn. And then one of my good friends, who's a heroin addict, grabbed me by the shoulder, and then another person grabbed the shoulder, and then before you knew it, somebody said, "Whose father?" And then somebody said, "Our Father." And then I'm telling you, man, in one voice, I couldn't recreate it now, but in one voice, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Yeah,
Thy
buddy.
kingdom come." Yeah, man, the whole thing, one voice. And that was the moment. That was the moment where I believed that I could turn the corner. Because in that moment, I accepted that there was something bigger than me, who I choose to call God now.
Right.
In rehab, I called him Big Papa.
Right.
And that's the moment where I accepted that I deserved recovery. Those guys saved my life. And God, in that moment, showing up and orchestrating that in a way that I never could have orchestrated it for myself. And so then I spent the rest of the time that I was there working again, learn about the disease of addiction, learn about recovery. And one of the things that I learned, man, is that this is a disease that we get a daily reprieve from. We get one day at a time. And someday, if you work a program of recovery, that thing that gripped you and held you in prison for a long time, for me, it was alcohol. The obsession, the mental obsession goes away. But it's only one day at a time. And man, when we stop working our program one day at a time and we start living too far into the future, or we neglect it and we stop doing the things that got us sober, that's when relapse happens. And unfortunately, this disease, it claims lives. I've had friends die. I've got friends in prison. I've got friends that haven't taken the advice of recovery programs and are paying the price for it now. It sucks.
It's devastating, man. I'm telling you, what I want to encourage you, number one, and it's on the back of another story that I think I've touched base with you originally before. I met a man in Halifax Airport in February of 2015. And I felt a stirring in my soul to go talk to this man. And I did. And I got to be honest with you, I totally chicken shit out. And I walked on past and I went down and got my Starbucks. And now that I got my little social, confidence booster, I went back and I just said hi again and started talking to him and chicken out again. 6 months later, that man walked into my church, into my home church. And now we're best friends. And he's in his 60s, like one of my best friends in his 60s. But what I didn't know at that point in time that he's told me since then and told many other people, so I don't mind repeating it, is that the 6-month gap between the first time I met him and the second time I met him, he put a gun in his mouth every single night. And what I can take from that is the fact that somebody was there for him, and he has now had countless influence and positive influence on the lives of hundreds of men. And the same thing with you now. You've come out the other side of addictions and recovery. And I know that that's a journey that you're going through every day, but now you've got this new fire lit to try to help other people and encourage other people and pull them through that as well. And that was one conversation that I had to you was the only reason that we do this, that we pull people out of the mud, is so that they can get on their feet and continue to pull other people out of the shit.
Yeah. I'm involved in a recovery program, which I won't mention publicly because, it's just part of the way we do things.
Yeah.
But really like what we're here for, the reason that we go and tell our stories is we're here for the suffering addict and alcoholic who still needs help. And what's crazy about some of these addiction rooms that people go into to recover is you can have a room with a guy who's been sober for 4 hours sitting next to a guy who's been sober for 49 years.
Right.
And can you imagine, after 49 years, people still show up? People still showing up to these rooms to recover. And it's partly because, yes, we need to maintain our recovery, but man, someone was there for us.
Yeah.
Someone was there for us when we were 4 hours sober and we needed help. And it becomes our duty and our responsibility to be there for other people so that when it's their turn to come to acceptance that they have a problem, that they know there's a place to turn.
Listen,
And,
I heard of that. I heard about a cardiac surgeon who is in his 70s and still goes to work every day. And it's like, man, he's got more money than God. Like, why is he still doing this? Because it's not about the money. It's if he stops working, people die.
Yeah. And
Right?
that's the reality of this disease, man. Like, people die. Like, I remember one of the first things that we had to deal with when I was in rehab was a funeral, because somebody that was in the program not too long before I got there died. Went out, thought he could have one more kick at the cat, one more good run, and then he was going to get sober for good. And it was that last time that killed him. And I got a good buddy of mine right now that is sitting in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary for the next 5 years because, unfortunately, he didn't get a chance to get into the rooms after rehab, and rehab only lasts for so long.
Yeah.
The statistics aren't good.
Right.
Like the statistics for people who go to rehab and relapse are actually astoundingly high. And I thought that I was going to go to rehab and get fixed, and that I could come out and live a normal life. That $17,200 and 90 days of my life was going to fix me. That's what it cost me to go to rehab.
Right.
But it really, what it gave me was a set of tools, and then the understanding that I needed something beyond that 90 days to carry me through. And that's why, like, before this COVID-19 business hit, I would be going to work, exercising, going to meetings 4 or 5 days a week, day in, day out, whether I felt like it or not, because that's what kept me sober.
Yeah.
That's what kept me on the right path.
Well, and like any warrior, you need to keep your weapon sharp, and you need to keep your armor on.
Man, and some of it's just fear too, because I'm like, here I am 2 years sober now, and I'm saying to myself, I'm not drinking and I'm going to meetings. So am I really going to risk not going to meetings?
Right.
That seems like a silly risk to take, because the stats tell us that the people who don't show up into meetings on a regular basis drink again. And for me, like, if I drink again, like, the reality is I'm going to lose a lot, and
that downhill slide, that's a steep slope, right?
There's
no
picks
get
up
back
right
up.
where it left off.
Yeah.
Like, for people, that's the one thing I wish people understood about addiction, is that, people think that if you stop your drug of choice or whatever, one of the things that our diseased brain tells us is, maybe I can try it again. Maybe I can have another. Maybe I could go ahead and just have one beer right now and I would be okay. Even though in my entire life, I've never wanted to have just one beer.
Right.
I don't understand what that's like.
Right.
But but that's what our disease tells us. Our disease tells us that we can do it again, and this time it's going to be different. But what happens is it picks up right where it left off, and it picks up with a veracity, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And the ultimate destination for addicts that don't get recovery, unfortunately, is jails, institutions, and death.
Yeah.
That's the only way this disease ends, brother. Like, there's no happy endings to it. You know, people either get into recovery when they're an addict, or they end up jails, institutions, and death, man. That's where it goes.
Well, listen, I don't want to keep you any longer. I do value your conversation. I really appreciate the time that you took today to have this conversation. I'm going to ask that anybody who watched this in its completion would only share the video and not repeat the things that are said here, because once again, you do have young children and families and stuff who have gone through this entire process. And the last thing that we want to do is open any wounds for anybody. But I do appreciate your sense of urgency to help to get in there and chip in this fight in whatever means possible with the people who are fighting against this right now. So I won't keep you, but brother, I do want to thank you for saving your life and for continuing to help save the lives of other people, because in this day and age, man, we've got every means of communication. We got zero excuse not to. And effectively communicating is what I think is the beginning stages of saving people's lives.
Yeah, and before I leave, if it's okay, John, I'd like to just give a couple of thank yous.
100%.
Some people that have helped me. I want to publicly acknowledge Clay Crossing Recovery Center in Maud, Oklahoma, which is where I went to rehab. So many people there helped me recover. And I mentioned the cost it cost me to go there. I would pay that 5 times over to go there again. It really saved my life, and it was amazing. So I just want to thank those people there. I want to thank my wife publicly. My wife, Kathy, for those who know her, has put up with more of my antics than any one woman should have to go through.
And some of my antics, for the record.
And no, but really and truly, this is a family disease.
Right.
And I'm so lucky, so lucky that I was able to find a way to keep my family intact. And I'm just so grateful that that woman who I love dearly stuck by me and is with me every step of the way in this recovery process. She supports my journey 100%. There's been countless nights where I've needed a meeting, and she's held down the fort with the kids in order to make that happen.
Right.
She's never stood in the way of anything that I needed to do to recover. And, that's meant her having to, sometimes not go to parties when I was in early recovery because it was going to make me uncomfortable. And she sacrificed so much. And honestly, like, without her, I'd like to think that I could do this on my own, but I don't know. So I just want to thank her for everything that she's done to help me get sober and stay sober. I'm the luckiest guy on the face of the planet. And that's the bottom line fact. It's the truth. And I'm just so grateful for her. And I want to thank all the friends that have been with me in this sort of recovery journey. The people in the rooms, the people outside of the rooms, the people that stuck with me when honestly there was really good reason to walk away. So for all those reasons, I'm a very grateful addict, and I'm so looking forward to the future and what it has in store, largely because of the support that I've had from those people.
Well, listen, I love you, brother. And once again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And we'll get some resources out here and post it in the link for anybody who sees this, who might need the help during this very difficult time and through their addictions and their recovery walk.
Thanks, brother.
All right, man. You have a good one.
You too.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you found some value in that conversation. For anybody who's going through these hard times right now and are struggling with mental health, self-worth, sobriety, anxiety, depression, please feel free to reach out. Please feel free to take advantage of any resources that are available to you to get through this very difficult time. We implore you, please, please, please reach out to your community at this point in time, and make sure that we all stand together and hold strong in this current pandemic. So God bless. I hope you have a great day. And if you like this, once again, as always, please feel free to share it and like it and distribute it amongst your own social circles. Hopefully these conversations will help somebody somewhere along the way. So God bless. Have a great day.